Hi, everyone. We're finishing setting up right now, but my name is Desi Gonzalez, and I work at the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh. I'm the manager of digital engagement there. That's my Twitter handle, at Desi Gonz.
I'm Ruben Niculcea. I am a software engineer for the Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh over at the Innovation Studio. And I'm also civically obligated to tell you that MCN50 is in Pittsburgh next year. Also, thank you so much for coming for this talk. I know it's filled with buzzwords, but I want you to know that we're actually going to make this talk about bait and switch marketing. Jokes aside, we're really excited to get started. So, Alan Kay is one of the pioneers of the graphical user interface, which is the primary mode of interacting with computers today, right? This is the GUI, right, as it's oftentimes called. It's, what you see on your touchscreen, what you're actually touching. Before that, it was mostly terminal-based interfaces. So you would type on a console, and then, commands that you phrased in a certain way would be interpreted, and then results would be spit back out to you on a console. In fact, if some of you remember MS-DOS, this was the primary mode of computing until the early 1980s with the Apple Macintosh, which was based upon Alan Kay's research. He's also been quoted as saying in the early 2000s that the computer revolution hasn't happened yet. He means a lot of different things by this, but we're only going to focus on one of them, and that's to say that personal computing is very new to us, right? It's a completely new media, and we don't really know what we can do with it yet. We haven't really explored all the possibilities with it, so it hasn't happened yet. With that said, thank you so much. There's two of them up here. This is I need to get maybe a stick that presses them both at the same time. With that said, oftentimes when we introduce new media, we copy the forms of old media, right? So a great example of this is early photography sort of mimicked, the old family portraits that you'd sit down and, you'd invite a painter over and he'd painstakingly paint you guys. But sometimes that can have creepy results, right? These paintings right here, I really like them because they look like something you'll see right before you die. Thanks. Not only that, but also when video was introduced, right? It took decades. It took 50 years until we started to understand the art of cinematography, right? The use of camera angles and perspectives and lighting and sound to tell a story that's really engaging. So, so why should we really expect that for, let's talk about, touchscreen phones, right? They've only been around for about a decade now. Why do we expect that we've already figured these out, right? We haven't. And with that said, oftentimes what we're doing is we're just mimicking paper. We're just mimicking old medias on these new ones. In fact, a great example of this is collection websites are oftentimes just salon-style gallery hangs, right? And mobile apps are oftentimes just digital brochures, complete with entering a number to go to a certain artwork, which mimics flipping to a page in a book. And these are our websites and mobile apps, so I want you to know we're making fun of ourselves, and we do this too, right? And with that.
So now I'm jumping in. So, one great example, actually, that I like is that we are today presenting to you using slides, which is, I had to get a Mad Men slide in there, but just kind of the old board presentations of your flipping them, or even the carousel slide projector, right? I think a lot of art history museums, or if you work in an art history department in a gallery, you're definitely familiar with this and how long we kind of held on to our slide libraries to document our art historical objects. Now we're replacing them with our digitized collections. But as it turns out, our interfaces are not just visual ones. This concept became really clear to me while Ruben and I were working on Out Loud, which is the Warhol's new inclusive audio guide. Just a plug, we launched it last week. It's available for download in the App Store. Our code is open source, so check it out if you'd like. But we started out this project. We were building a new audio guide for the museum because we didn't have one at all, but we were specifically thinking about how we can make the museum accessible for visitors with visual impairments. So I'm about to show you a clip of one of our partners who we worked with on the process. Her name's Anne, and she's fully blind. At the beginning of the process, she told us that the most important piece of technology that she uses is her iPhone. And in this clip, you'll get a sense of how she uses Voiceover, which is the iOS screen reader functionality, to interface with her phone. So she's flipping through our app in this. And hopefully the Wi-Fi will be good enough. If not, I'll switch to the local file on my computer. I'll pull this other one up for you guys. I think I need to exit. 1 second. I'm going to figure this out. Let's exit this mode. You can see all my notes. Pull up this video. All right.
Hi, my name is Donald Warhol.
You don't want that. So it's probably unintelligible to a lot of people. That is, Anne puts her voiceover up to almost the fastest speed it can go on her phone. Voiceover is basically a synthesized voice that is interpreting what we see visually into speech. And she puts hers up at a really high speed for a number of reasons, but including privacy. So other people around her don't hear it. But also she just wants to navigate through her phone as quickly as possible. I'm going to pull the slides back up real quickly. There we go. So, like other screen readers I mentioned, it's translating what a sighted user would see into the synthesized speech. What becomes really important when you're building your app in this way is that things like the semantic code, the labels that you use, the image descriptions that you put in there, all of that becomes important to making the app accessible. And so what I learned that was super important from Anne and other community partners we worked with is that digital tools are not just visual tools. They're already being interpreted, or presented in different ways, and that a device like an iPhone has a screen reader built into it. So anyone who might be blind or have low vision can use a tool like that to access your website, for example. So we need to stop thinking about our interfaces as just visual ones, because there are many ways to tap into the technology. And in the next few slides, Ruben and I are going to be examining some of the interesting trends in interface design that we're seeing these days that are moving away from or enhancing kind of traditional visual interfaces. It's not just a laundry list of categories of interfaces, although it might seem like that. We could write a whole book about that. There's a great Wikipedia page about different types of interfaces. But instead what we're trying to do is we're trying to challenge the ways we're thinking about our interfaces. So we've been developing a little bit of a framework to think about them. One way to look at the kinds of interfaces we use is through modalities of interacting. So related to our senses, what are these inputs and outputs that we use to interact with our interfaces? So I've included a few here: graphical, tangible, voice, spatial or kinetic, and auditory. It's in no way exhaustive. You can think about the crazy other interfaces people are doing with taste or smell, right? But these are ones we're highlighting today. And I'm actually skipping graphical and visual interfaces, because we've talked about that a little bit, and going to auditory. It's another one that we're pretty familiar with. Out loud, for example, is something that its output is auditory through the screen reader functionality, but also through the audio itself from the audio guide. But here's where it gets more exciting with tangible interfaces. This is a project from the Tangible Media Group at the MIT Media Lab. On the right, a man is using his hands to control what's on the left, which is a 3D surface. And in this case, when he moves his hands, the elevation of the different kind of bits on the surface raise up and down, and it controls how the ball moves around. So the creators of this project talk about, like, what's the potential of this? They say something like this might allow you to, I don't know, hold hands with a person who's hundreds of miles away, which is really interesting. We're seeing tangible interactions in museums as well. On the left, we have the Cooper Hewitt's pen, which I think a lot of people here are probably familiar with how you take one end and you press one end of the pen to object label to virtually collect that object. You can use the stylus on the other side to activate screens around the museum. On the right, I have an image from the Lower East Side Tenement Museum. It's their Shop Life exhibition. It's their interactive at the end of the Shop Life exhibition. In the exhibition, they take kind of the over 150 years of the building's storefront's life and talk about the different tenants and the stories and the histories that come along with that. And so this interactive, you take different objects and place them onto the surface to activate archival documents, quotes, videos that relate to those objects. Now, neither of these interfaces are solely tangible ones, but it's interesting to see how museums are starting to think about how we can use real-world objects to interact with our information. And I think this is kind of a no-brainer for museums, right? We are stewards of objects. How can we think about objects as part of our interactions? There's also kind of a lot of moving and shaking in the world of voice interfaces these days. A lot of us have them in our pockets already with things like Siri on the iPhone. Google has its own voice commands. Here on the left of my screen, I've included a cartoon of a guy talking to Alexa, in the Amazon Echo speaker, right? Alexa's the name of the kind of the voice assistant. People are talking about how the Amazon Echo, or hailing it as kind of this proof of concept for the future of a connected home, right? A centralized kind of voice-controlled operating system that will allow you to do things from order more paper towels to like playing your music to also turning on your appliance someday, right? And people are thinking about how we can build on a tool like this. And you can do that just from like screaming across your room, right? On the right, I have actually a short video. I'll play a little bit about it in a second, but this is a startup from Pittsburgh that we're buddies with, Conversant Labs. They're working specifically on voice interfaces. They've developed a software development kit that allows anyone to build an app onto an app that already exists to add kind of this voice interface layer onto it. So I'm going to play a tiny bit. It's kind of a long video, but you'll get a sense of how it works. Should I make the screen bigger also, if it plays? Well, I'll keep talking while that's loading, and if it doesn't load, then you'll...
If your apps could talk,
oh, great.
What would they say? At Conversant Labs, we bring your apps to life and give users a new way to speak with their world.
Can I get an espresso?
That's one espresso for $2.50. Would you like to try our new blueberry muffins?
Sure.
Great.
So I'm not going to play the whole video, but the end of the video, he ends up like using an app to buy different ingredients, like a muffin tin, and then using an app to make his muffins at home. And like when he's making the muffins at home, he doesn't even need to touch he's covered in flour and doesn't even need to touch the device. And Conversant Labs is thinking specifically about accessibility and more inclusive design, but for all people, right? They're thinking about both maybe users who have visual impairments, also thinking about how we can have a hands-free experience as we use these devices that are everywhere in our life, from the coffee shop to your home. So the last modality I'm going to talk about today is kind of like a spatial or kinetic modality, movement in space, whether this means you're moving your body to activate an interface or an application, or working with interfaces. Oops. There we go. Or working with interfaces that are location aware. And I think, I have Pokemon Go here as an example. It's a really recent phenomenon that is successful in the location-based interaction side of things. Another project, this is a museum project that is using kind of spatial or kinetic interactions from the Carnegie Museum, the Pittsburgh's Innovation Studio. So my buddies over at the Carnegie Museum of Art have this light clock exhibition up. It's part of the larger Hillman Photography Initiative. And this year they kind of are exploring this Roland Barthes quotation that cameras are clocks for seeing and measuring time. So the project consists of 2 parts. Outside of the museum, you have this old-style clock that takes a photograph every 5 minutes. It's a 360-degree photograph, and it's kind of capturing the Pittsburgh surroundings, right? And then we're logging all of these images, and inside visitors can use the big screen display here. You stand there like that little girl is doing. If you spin around counterclockwise, it is going through that data bank of images that we're collecting, and you're navigating just one photo in space, right, 360, but if you rotate in the other way, it'll go through time, allow you to navigate that way. And it's a pretty fun project, and we get a lot of people twirling around like that at the museum.
Now, there's also more than just physical interfaces, right? More than just modalities. There's also, sort of beyond physical interfaces, and we have some of them listed over here, and I'm going to go into more detail about them. So the first one is adaptive, right? An adaptive interface is an interface that learns your preferences and slowly starts to rearrange content depending on your preferences. An adaptive interface, an example of that would be, an artificial intelligence system. But we actually see these in our everyday lives between, Twitter, Facebook, and Google. These are all adaptive. They collect, the links that you click on, your favorite tweets, your favorite posts, and not only do they do something creepy, display ads, but they also use that information to present to you content that they believe will be relevant to you. Also, shameless plug, we use an adaptive interface in Warhol Out Loud in that our tour stops is not a single audio clip. Rather, we have multiple audio clips assigned to a tour stop, and slowly as you listen to those audio clips, they're tagged in the background, and we learn your preferences, and the next tour stop you visit, we rearrange that audio content based upon your preferences. There's also conversational interfaces. These are interfaces that try to mimic, the messiness of everyday human speech, right? Obviously, Amazon Alexa, Apple Siri, Google Assistant, but they don't necessarily need to be voice-driven. They can also be graphically driven, right? This right here is the Quartz app for iOS, which is basically kind of like a visual news reader. I've heard it described as what if you were texting your friend about the news. There's also, the Brooklyn Museum's Ask app, right, where you're conversating with somebody, with the domain-specific expert on the artwork that you're seeing. Another category is immersive. Now, an immersive interface is one that tries to take you in. It tries to suck you in so that, that's all you're thinking about. And it's not just AR and VR. There's more than just that. You can have an immersive interface that has physical elements to it. We oftentimes do this in museums, right? You walk into a gallery that's all Renaissance painting, and all of the furniture is Renaissance, right? We set a mood. We sort of suck you in, and you can see that through a lot of different ways. Now, we also wanted to take our little framework and apply it to some examples. Now, it's important to note that these examples that we're highlighting, they're our own, so we're really proud of them. But it's not like you can just hit all of these categories and have something that's great, right? It's rather think about these categories and ones that are not listed here and try to pick the best ones you can to tell the best story that you can. This right here is the section of mystery. This was another Innovation Studio project. We noticed We have a bird hall over at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, and we had these little tiny doors. And we noticed that kids would walk by and just start tugging on these doors. And we always locked them because there was nothing really behind there. But we had the idea of how can we expose more of our collection to that? So what we have now is as you're walking through that space, that door sound propagates through that door. And it's an animal of some type making some type of call. And then when you open that door, you see a hologram of that animal that was making that noise. And every time you close and you open that door, it's a completely different animal. So right here, we're using graphical, we're using tangible, we're using auditory, and we're using immersive interfaces because we want to tell this story about these different animals in our collection.
So we're going to loop back to Out Loud, right? Out Loud is another example of these kind of intersecting types of interfaces and approaches that we're taking. And by approaching our interfaces in multiple ways, we're able to make it more accessible. So I've mentioned kind of all of these before, but Out Loud has its graphical component, its spatial component, but because it's we're pushing out content based on your location using Bluetooth beacons, auditory with using a screen reader, but also just the fact that it's an audio guide, and its adaptive interface that's changing, rearranging the order that you hear the audio based on your preference and needs. So these are just some of what we've been seeing out there and the ways that people are thinking about their interfaces in a kind of a beyond paper sort of way, both inside and outside of museums. So looping back to our BFF Alan Kay, he argues, right, that we haven't reached that great potential that computers have to offer, right? We're not there yet, but we are on a journey towards that direction, right? And as he once said, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. Thank you.
All right, so we have about 7 minutes for questions and answers, so please feel free to interact, ask questions.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm interested in the response we've gotten from the adaptive aspect of the app. And do people like that? They want things that are more targeted to them, or are they like confused by that?
That's a great question. We launched a week ago and we haven't evaluated it, but we will be. I actually don't think anyone notices right now. The one thing that I think people may notice is one of the things we are doing also with that adaptiveness is that if you turn on the screen reader, you will always get the visual description about an artwork right after the introduction. And we're making an assumption that if you have the screen reader on, that you also probably want a visual description of what an artwork looks like before diving into more content. And in our testing, we've done a ton of user testing along the way with community partners who have visual impairments. They've been into that. No one has really noticed that we're changing the other things, and I don't know if it's important, actually, for people to know. One thing I would like to test is when people go to a museum together and are using audio guides, but one audio guide is giving your list of short audio clips different than your friends. Is that a confusing experience? So those are some of the things we've been thinking about so far.
Actually, I have a follow-up question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Is there any concern that what you're doing with the adaptive functionality that you prevent the audience from exploring other things they may do if you don't have this adaptive option for them?
Yeah, so one thing we're doing is we're trying to preserve context, right? So different audio content is tagged with different, they're lumped into what we call chapters, and all those chapters have the same category. So we try to preserve context in that way, and I would say the other way is we never completely remove something. It's always there. It might have been pushed further down the list, but we don't hide something from you.
And I think you're right. It's something we were talking about at first. We do put the visual descriptions at the end if you don't have the screen reader on, and I think that was I'm not sure if that was the right choice, right? Visual descriptions, the way that we're authoring them, we're making them, as a resource that's great for everyone. I've gotten feedback from people that it really made them see an artwork in a different way. But the primary audience for those is audiences who are blind or have low vision. And we have put them last because something that I saw in other places where I worked was confusion about what a visual description is. So, and I don't know if that was the right, kind of choice for us, an ethical choice, or even just a philosophical how we feel about things that are designed for a more inclusive audience, and how it, is putting it last, like saying that it's not as important. I feel bad about that, and I'm conflicted.
Right. Well, it's continued to be discussed and researched. Any other questions?
Also critiques, anything else? We've been thinking about this a lot, thinking about different ways to, the framework that we've kind of come up with overlapping types of interfaces, and we're not sure if we've quite nailed everything yet, but just how can we push our thinking in the way that we're producing experiences?
Absolutely.
Hey, Sina.
We have a few hands, yes.
Oh, P.S. Sina has
Sina,
been
please, yes.
He's been instrumental in the Out Loud project.
Wonderful. Yeah, there is no mic to pass around, I'm sorry. Sure.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm going to repeat that really quickly. Sina was mentioning that anytime that we create something that is for a community that might not necessarily normally be represented in museums, we should be talking about that and putting that out there. Did I get it right? Yeah, and I think that's totally true. I think one thing that we have on our audio guide also that I haven't talked about, we have these tactile reproductions in our galleries. They're reproductions of Warhol artworks. And part of what we did was working with Sina, we created visual descriptions for the artwork it's based on, but also kind of a guided tactile experience that guides you through feeling the work. So you're understanding what you're feeling as you're going through that. And something I'd like to do on that is explain why we did all of that, right? Just put out there, what does it mean for someone to experience these things in different ways? And that could be a cool phase 2 for our app.
I noticed there was a question over in this direction.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you have had a chance to sort of, and how you've done it, formally integrated this into your design process. Is it something that you're now kind of starting to define, or are you really starting every project looking at this framework and how?
Yeah, I mean, it's that's definitely hard. This framework is new to us.
It's kind of come out of the work that we've been doing.
Yeah.
But I don't know, do you think you'd use it for the innovation studio going forward?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, Alan Kay to me is a big hero in my life. I can, if you want to grab beers sometimes and really just chat about his life and how I feel like computers are terrible. I always tell people I'm a software engineer in spite of code, not because of code. Just let's really push this media, right? Let's try to tell the best stories we can.
And while we have a framework, and we had 5 rows going one way and 3 rows going another way, I'd like to think that you can add on to it, right? That it's we called it, I think Ruben called it the weave framework, right? And that we're weaving together our digital tools. I really like thinking about it that way.
Well, I think the time is over. Thank you so much for the presentation and the great information.